Hi everyone, my name is Johnny and this is Kristian, and today we're going to be running through what's available to you as a developer with the ArcGIS platform, with a particular focus on web development and JavaScript. Hopefully we'll be able to give you a flavor of the kind of rich variety of options which are out there for you when you're working with ArcGIS services to build your own GIS web applications. On the screen, you can see that there's a bit.ly link. This goes directly to this slide deck, and it has lots of interactive examples and notes that you can access. So it's bit.ly/AC22 JS dev, if anyone's interested. So I wanted to start the talk off with kind of going back to basics with a very simple but powerful statement, and that is that ArcGIS is an API. With the ArcGIS system, all of your hosted data, as well as the location and spatial analytics services you might be using, have been made accessible by Esri in a rich, modern API. This is a RESTful API. It's built using open standards, and it can be accessed by simple web requests, simple HTTP methods. And fundamentally, this means that once your data is hosted in the ArcGIS ecosystem, it's not static, it's not stuck in kind of one person's desktop, it's automatically available to anyone and anything that has the permissions to access it. And again, this is happening by HTTP requests, and you can return JSON, GeoJSON image tiles from your services. For this talk, our area of focus is going to be towards the web APIs. I'm going to be talking a bit about the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. Kristian's going to be talking about some patterns for integrating with other third-party mapping libraries. We're going to be focusing on the web APIs, which are making these requests to your services. They're returning things like this is some JSON which is being returned from a service, and they're going to be wrapping around them to be able to produce an interactive map application. So for those of you who went to Ewan's earlier sort of introductory session, you're probably familiar with the ArcGIS platform. This was launched last year, and it really simplifies the way in which developers are now able to work with the platform. It introduced support for sort of industry standard API keys, as well as a way to really quickly and easily start hosting your own data services. There's a number of different aspects to it. You've got the developer experience, which we're really excited about, access to lots of powerful mapping APIs, simple sort of integration patterns, and lots of documentation and resources. You've got the ability to start hosting your own services, access lots of spatial analytics capabilities, and then you've got the business model, which is very flexible. It's consumption-based pricing, and it's got a very generous free tier. So I'm going to jump over and just give you a quick introductory demo of the ArcGIS platform. I'm just going to show you how I can access and create an API key. So you can see on the screen here, I've got my recent API keys. Here I can manage which capabilities I want to be working with in my web application, whether I just want to have access to the base map services or different analytics capabilities. I can sort of configure the authentication, restrict API key access to specific clients, specific referrers, and also monitor the usage. I've also got a section where I can start managing my hosted data. I can start adding data to be hosted as a service within ArcGIS. So I've got some cycle route data, which I've added in and hosted as a feature layer, and I'm going to be demoing just a small workflow of building up an application using this cycle trip I did near Bristol. As well as kind of configuring your API key and things, you have access to lots of documentation. I'm going to show you that the sample code section of the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. This is probably where I always start off when I'm starting to build a new application. You've got lots of examples for all of the different aspects of the API. They're all in nice sort of coding sandboxes, and you can pick out bits of code, see workflows, and bring them into your own application. So I think a good developer practice is to steal good code. Switch back. Oh, no, that's a different tab. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about the ArcGIS JavaScript API. I think the first thing to say is that at Esri, we eat our own dog food. All of our web tools, all of our mapping applications like the map viewer, dashboards, suite by ArcGIS all use the ArcGIS JavaScript API. So as those tools improve, so does the ArcGIS JavaScript API. It has plenty of powerful visualization, smart mapping, and analytics capabilities, which you can bring directly into your applications. It's very easy to start creating interactive 2D and 3D user experiences. It's almost trivial to go from a 2D map to a 3D map. And it's highly tailored to working with the ArcGIS ecosystem. So you can work seamlessly with ArcGIS services. There's plenty of widgets which allow you to bring out interesting analysis from your services. And finally, it has a modular design. So you can build a very mean, kind of lean application, but you also have plenty of options to add more and more functionality to build up ever more increasing complex workflows. And you can consume it in ES modules, AMD modules, and that can work with your kind of local build processes, Webpack and React, and the different frameworks you might be using. So I'm going to work through a simple demo. I'm going to be adding that cycle route, which I had, into a web map. So I've got my API key, which I've got for my developers' dashboards. I've got my feature layer, which I've also hosted there. I'm going to create a new map and then add it into a map view. And you'll see up here on the right side of the screen, it's not the best map. It's just a kind of a thin line, very hard to see. So I'm going to first add some styling to make it more clear. So I'm going to change the renderer of my layer. I'm going to define a new simple renderer, and I'm going to update that definition for the map. And now it's standing out a bit more clearly, it's a bit easier to see. But as I was saying, one of the great things about the ArcGIS API is how well it integrates with the wider ecosystem. So I've got a colleague who's created me a web map in my portal, and instead of building up the map programmatically, I can just reference that web map item ID and bring that in and replace my map view with the map which references that web map. And so prepare for your retinas to be blinded by a very Tour de France kind of themed map. It's very yellow, so they've customized the base map. You can now see that there's a bit more complex symbology, so you can now actually track the direction of the cycle routes. It's referencing some other data sets. You've got the national cycle route data set from Sustrans, and so you've got some extra context to the cycle route. But I also want to kind of show you how hard the cycle route was. There's a real big hill in the middle, so I'm going to add an elevation profile widget. And this is just one of the Esri widgets they provide in the API. You can use it in scenes and in the 2D map view to show kind of a representation of height in your map. So I'm going to add that widget into my map. Just make this full screen so you can see it a bit larger. And we can now track the elevation across my cycle routes. And you can see this kind of big hill right here in the middle. So I've done that as a 2D map, but as I said earlier, it's very easy to create 3D maps as well. So I'm just going to take the map which I defined earlier, and instead of creating a map view, I'm going to create a scene view. And so let's switch out from our 2D map. And we're now going to have a 3D scene. I can zoom to this hill. And again, I want to have that elevation profile widget in my map. So I add it again. I had to add just the same code into my application. And I can now, again, kind of trace and see exactly where that hill is. So I know that's a very brief tour of the ArcGIS JavaScript API, but I hope it kind of gives you a bit of an example of the wide variety of capabilities there are. I'm now going to pass over to Kristian, who's going to talk about integrating ArcGIS capabilities in third-party applications.
Thanks, Johnny. I thought that was a really great presentation of how powerful and easy to use the ArcGIS API for JavaScript is, especially when you're starting from scratch. And since you're already using ArcGIS, I would really recommend working with that. However, some of you might already have created an application with a different mapping library in the past, or maybe you're more comfortable using a different tool set. That is completely fine, because today I'm going to show you how easy it is to integrate ArcGIS capabilities in your third-party applications. There's many web mapping libraries out there. Two of the most common alternatives to the JavaScript API are Leaflet and Mapbox GL.js. Leaflet is an open source project for which we have created a plugin called Esri Leaflet that extends the existing classes and provides support for vector services, hosted feature services, and many other premium location services. Mapbox GL.js, on the other hand, is a commercial product for which we have created comprehensive documentation that will teach you how you can utilize the open standard of the REST services to bring ArcGIS to life in your Mapbox applications. It utilizes the ArcGIS REST.js, which will help you to replace many of Mapbox's paid-for features with an Esri equivalent, if you would like to do so. If you haven't heard of ArcGIS REST.js before, that's again okay, because I'm going to talk about that a bit more later. Now, I don't know about you, but with the country reopening and business travel coming back to normal, I keep finding myself in situations where I'm traveling to one of our many offices around the country, just desperate for a coffee. And I wouldn't be an engineer and a software developer if I wouldn't develop an app that over-engineers an answer to this problem. And you can see this app, what I started with here on the right. It's one of my existing Mapbox applications, and it's very simple. All it has is a drop-down menu in the top right corner, where you can choose one of our offices. So let's zoom in on the Aylesbury office. That's all it does. Over the next couple of slides, I'm going to improve on this app. In 3 steps, we're going to update the base map. Then we're going to bring in data from an ArcGIS Online hosted feature layer. And then we're going to find cafes within a 5-minute walking distance around these offices. All the code samples are hosted on CodePen. So if you want to see the full code, you can just click on Edit on CodePen in the top right corner. Let's get started. Updating the base map. As Johnny mentioned earlier, most of your applications will start with your API key. It's your access point to access base maps, your secured services, or premium location services. Once we have that, we specified the base map URL, which always follows the same format. But it takes different base map identifiers. In this case, I've chosen the ArcGIS navigation base map. There's lots of different base maps out there. And if you would like to see the full list with all the identifiers, you can click on the green base map link up here, which will take you to the documentation. In the end, you see that there's our API key is being used as a token to access these base maps. Once we have the URL, we just have to update the style property in our map object to use the base map URL. Okay, I'm just going to copy the API key from here and onto the next slide. Here you find the code for the application I was showing you earlier, and we're just going to make these changes quickly. I'm going to bring in my API key. You see I've already specified the base map URL to use ArcGIS navigation. And then I'm going to replace the style to use our base map URL instead of Mapbox's style. And here we are, ArcGIS navigation now as base map. Easy as that. All right, let's bring in some data. I can imagine that many of you already have lots of data hosted either in your enterprise portal or ArcGIS Online, and that you would like to bring that data into your Mapbox application. Behind your data layers in ArcGIS Online sits a REST service. Unfortunately, Mapbox doesn't support these REST services because they're our technology and Mapbox is a competitor. They have no interest in supporting them. But one thing they do support, and we support, and many other libraries such as OpenLayers or Leaflet support, is GeoJSON. GeoJSON is an open standard that's very similar to JSON. It's just a bit more strict in its formatting. What we're doing here is you can see that we're adding our source, our data source, and we're getting our data from our REST service as GeoJSON because we can query that data and have the data returned as GeoJSON. If you look at that URL here, you see that we specify the data layer. It's hosted in ArcGIS Online. The layer itself is called Esri UK Office View, and we are performing a query. These are our parameters. We have the where statement, which is a SQL clause, 1 = 1. It's always true, so we're going to return all the features. And then we set the out fields as star, which will return all our fields. and the format is GeoJSON. You can see the result of that query in here. It's need GeoJSON with our properties and our coordinates. This is a great way of working with your data because it lets you filter the data at the time of importing into your application. That lets you or ensures that your app will remain performant and you only import what you need, keeping the traffic to a minimum. Once we have set the source, we can add the layer and the labeling in classic Mapbox fashion. And this is what it looks like. Same app as before, but now we have brought into the application our hosted feature layer, and you can see these point locations here for our offices. Okay, before we continue our quest for coffee, let me quickly introduce ArcGIS REST.js. All interactions with our REST services are based on the ArcGIS REST API. These can be quite easy. As you saw on the previous slide, we did the query, which was using the REST API, and it was just one line with a few parameters. Very easy. However, they can also be more complicated, where there's lots of parameters, maybe the request runs asynchronously, or it has to be a post request. This is where ArcGIS REST.js comes into play. It's a collection of lightweight JavaScript modules that serve as a wrapper for the REST API. And they really simplify the execution of complicated workflows. And what would be otherwise a quite complicated logic in your code can be just a couple of lines with the parameters, and it will fulfill a promise that we can work with. To use this in our application, we just have to add the modules we need at the beginning of our script. Back to the coffee. We are going to use REST.js twice. First, to find a service area around the offices, which is also known as a drive time analysis. We want to find the 5-minute walking area around the offices. And then we're going to do a geocoding, where we'll try to find the point locations of cafes within that 5-minute walking area. Initially, we're going to bring in again the source and then add the layer to our map. However, notice how this time the data is empty. So there's no data added at this point, but rather later when we run the REST.js methods, we're going to update this data source. And we do the same thing for the geocoding. Again, here as well, the data is currently empty. The way our application is going to work is that every time we're going to make a change to the drop-down menu in the top right, so every time we choose different office, it's going to run this update service areas function. As part of that function, we're going to use the service area method of ArcGIS REST, which takes a whole lot of parameters. So make sure that you check the documentation because you can be really nitty-gritty with what you want your method to return. And in the end, after I've set all of these, we have our promise, our response, which will return a polygon, and we use that to update our data source from the previous slide. And then down here, we do the same thing with the geocode method. We set our parameters. Note here how we are specifying the category as coffee shops. We are searching for coffee shops within our area, within our service area. And then the response is used to update the data source. And here we have our final application. I'm based in Edinburgh, so I know the Edinburgh coffee scene quite well, but I'm actually planning to see the Belfast office quite soon. They've recently moved, so I was wondering whether there's maybe a cafe nearby where I could go to in between two meetings. And perfect, the Yard Gallery is just a stone throw away. That'll be perfect. But we end it here now. We're at the QE2, and all that talk about coffee actually got me really thirsty. So let's see if there's anything where I could get my coffee fix. That looks pretty promising. Just downstairs, Wesley's Cafe. That should be just there, I think. Brilliant. Well, I hope you enjoyed this demonstration of how you can integrate ArcGIS in your third-party applications using the REST API, as well as REST.js. And yeah, see you later at Wesley's.
Yeah, okay. We had just one final slide just to kind of finish it off. We did have to do a trip yesterday just to check that cafe existed, and it did. So, so just wanted to say that, yeah, as Kristian showed, the ArcGIS platform offers lots of ways to really simply integrate with ArcGIS capabilities into your applications. We really suggest you head over to the developers.arcgis.com site and get started with your free developer account. And we kind of wanted to leave you on kind of our philosophy, kind of a good developer is a bit of a lazy developer. You're choosing the path of least resistance. And so we think that if you're starting from scratch, we'd always recommend for you to use the ArcGIS API for JavaScript, but also it has lots of options for continuously extending your applications. But there's lots of room for you to be able to work with existing applications which aren't within the ArcGIS ecosystem, still accessing the services that you might have. So yeah, as Kristian said, come and find us outside after the break, and we're happy to talk about anything we've talked about.
Thank you.